interpret your preaching text. Interpretation is very, very important. That is the first step when you prepare your preaching. So let's go one by one. There are three things that I want to take steps with you. First one is this. What are the sub-ideas? Last time we talked about keywords and the main idea of the preaching text. Today, sub-ideas. The second, what is the big context of this text? Now, this is a little different from big idea. Big idea is the one overarching main message of the text that you are preaching. But what is the big context? I mean, Old Testament and New Testament. What is the big context of the text? And then number three, how do I write an outline? You know, not everyone writes an outline, but however, it is very, very helpful if you can write down an outline of your sermon. Now, how can you write the outline? So those are the three things that we're going to look at. Now, main idea. Do you remember in the Mark chapter 5, that the text that we just studied last time? The main idea was this. Jesus cast out unclean spirits and changed the demon-possessed man. Just a big idea. Now, let's look at the text one more time. And let's figure out what are the sub-ideas from this text. Okay, Mark chapter 5, verses 1 through 20. So verse 1, they came to the other side of the sea, to the country of the Gerasenes. And when Jesus had stepped out of the boat, immediately there met him out of the tombs a man with an unclean spirit. He lived among the tombs, and no one could bind him anymore, not even with a chain. For he had often been bound with shackles and chains, but he wrenched the chains apart, and he broke the shackles in pieces. No one had the strength to subdue him. Night and day among the tombs and on the mountains, he was always crying out and cutting himself with stones. Now, what sub-ideas do you find in this text? I think there is a main idea, sub-idea here. Jesus met the man with unclean spirit. Okay, from verses 1 through 5. And also, there is some details there. It described about the unclean spirits. First, that he was living in the tomb, and no one could control him, breaking all chains, and crying out and cutting himself with stone every day and night. So that was the condition of this unclean spirit, that Jesus met the man with this unclean spirit. Now, let's go to the next part, which is verse 6. And when he saw Jesus from afar, he ran and fell down before him, and crying out with a loud voice, he said, "What have you to do with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? I adjure you by God, do not torment me." For he was saying to him, "Come out of the man, you unclean spirit." And Jesus asked him, "What is your name?" He replied, "My name is Legion, for we are many." And he begged him earnestly not to send him out of the country. Now a great herd of pigs was feeding there on the hillside. And they begged him, saying, "Send us to the pigs, let us enter them." So he gave them permission. And the unclean spirits came out and entered the pigs, and the herd, numbering about 2,000, rushed down the steep bank into the sea and drowned in the sea. Now, what sub-idea do you see in this text? From verses 6 through 13, Jesus casted out unclean spirits. And also you see some details how Jesus cast it out. First, the man fell down and said, "Don't torture me." But to this, Jesus said, "Come out, unclean spirit." The name is Legion. Do you remember the key word? The 6,000 evil spirits, the Legion. And then the Legion said, "Send us to pig." And they went into pigs and were drowned. Now, this is how Jesus casted out the unclean spirits. So that's the sub-idea number 2. Let's look at the final section from verse 14. The herdsmen fled and told it in the city and in the country, and people came to see what it was that had happened. And they came to Jesus and saw the demon-possessed man, the one who had had the legion, sitting there clothed and in his right mind. And they were afraid. And those who had seen it described to them what had happened to the demon-possessed man and to the pigs. And they began to beg Jesus to depart from their region. And he was getting into the boat. The man who had been possessed with demons begged him that he might be with him. And he did not permit him, but said to him, "Go home to your friends and tell them how much the Lord has done for you, and how he has had mercy on you." And he went away and began to proclaim in the Decapolis how much Jesus had done for him, and everyone marveled. What sub-idea do you see in this text? Jesus changed demon-possessed man. The details: people saw demon-possessed man sat and clothed. They saw this man was changed. And these people, interestingly, they begged Jesus to leave the region. But demon-possessed men begged to follow Jesus. And Jesus told him to go and share what Jesus did, and he did. So you see that there's three sub-ideas in this text. So let's put them all together. The main idea from verse 1 through 20 was Jesus cast out the unclean spirits and changed the man. That was the main idea. However, there are three sub-ideas that we just looked at. First, Jesus met the man with the unclean spirits from verse 1 through 5. And second, Jesus cast out the unclean spirits, 6 through 13. And Jesus changed the man with unclean spirits, 14 through 20. So you see that there's a main idea and sub-ideas of this passage. So I want you to write down those things, because if you don't write down, then you will forget. So it is always important to get the main idea and sub-ideas. Now, the second question, do you remember that? What to interpret your preaching text? It is to know what is the big context of the whole Bible. Because even when you get the main idea, sub-ideas, if they do not align with the main big context of the Bible, then probably your interpretation is wrong. So it is always important to get that checked out by this big context. Now, what is the big context of the Bible? It's a very, very easy question. I mean, difficult question, but easy answer. Sunday school answer. The answer is Jesus. Christ is the main big context of the whole Bible, Old Testament, New Testament. Because Jesus said that, Luke chapter 24, 27, it says, "In the beginning with Moses and all the prophets," which means the Old Testament, Jesus interpreted to them in all the scriptures the things concerning himself. So Jesus himself interpreted the Old Testament, because at that time there was only one scripture, which is Old Testament. There was no New Testament at that time. And Jesus interpreted Old Testament, and he said this is all about himself, which means Jesus. The Old Testament is about Jesus. Now, Christopher Wright, he's a biblical scholar. He said, not only does the Old Testament tell the story which Jesus completes, it also declares the promise which Jesus fulfills. See, the Old Testament is talking about Jesus. This is a very, very important thing, because New Testament, we know that New Testament is always talking about Jesus. However, Old Testament does as well. So the big idea, big context of the whole Bible is Jesus Christ. So let's come back to main and sub-ideas, and let's check if main and sub-ideas reveal Jesus Christ. Yeah, let's check that. Main idea, Jesus cast out the unclean spirits and changed the man. So definitely it talks about Jesus. And sub-ideas, Jesus met the man, Jesus cast out, Jesus changed the man. So it talks about Jesus, what Jesus did. So yes, check. So all reveals the big context of the whole Bible. Now, what about the Old Testament? Because the Old Testament doesn't even tell the name Jesus. For example, like 1 Samuel 17, 41 through 53. It's a famous story of David and Goliath, right? Goliath insulted David and God. However, our little David killed Goliath with a sling, and Israel defeated Philistine army. none of that talks about Jesus, right? It talks about David, Goliath, and Israel and Philistine. That's about it. So how do we, know that this is really talking about Jesus Christ? However, if you look at the Bible in the big lens, big perspective, that Jesus Christ, actually David, King David, is portraying the true King David, which is Jesus Christ, who is victorious. So David, the story of David is not only about the David at that time, but actually it is showing who Jesus is, ultimately, who is the victorious king over spiritual Philistines, spiritual army, the evil ones. And we see that today in the Mark chapter 5, that Jesus defeated the evil spirit man, right? So in the Old Testament, New Testament, ultimately it is really showing who Christ is. So this is the very, very important key factor of interpretation of the Bible, because many times we can just stay in the Old Testament, like, okay, David was a pretty cool guy, but that's not the conclusion, because David is not the focus in the Bible. The focus is Christ. So when we end preaching, each time, name of Jesus must be commented, must be exalted and lifted up and worshipped. Because Old Testament, New Testament, our preaching, the purpose is to proclaim who Jesus is and what he has done. Now the last part is this. How do I write an outline? Okay? I salute you if you have all in your mind so you don't have to write anything. That's great. If that's your style, that's good. However, for me, I have to write down the outline so that I can develop a full manuscript out of that outline. Now, if you write an outline, how can you write it? First thing you need to do is this. Now, it's time to decide title of sermon. Okay? Sometimes some people begin with sermon title first, but I really recommend you study Bible first and then write down the outline. And as you are writing the outline, then you can come up with some kind of title, because title must be based on the biblical text, not based on your mind, right? So decide a title of sermon. Look at the main idea. Jesus cast out the unclean spirits and changed the man. Now, from this main idea, you can come up with some kind of title. It could be like Jesus, the demon caster, or Power of Jesus. But my title, when I was preaching this sermon, my title was Nature. Okay? Because the sub-ideas are revealing the nature of something. Let me go on. You can, based on that title, you can rename the sub-ideas. So that's the next step. For example, first, do you remember the 3 sub-ideas that we came up with? The first sub-idea was that Jesus met the man with unclean spirits. So that was the sub-idea. But I am renaming that sub-idea like this: nature of evil, because the title that I have was nature, right? But first sub-ideas is really revealing what is the condition of the unclean spirits. So what is the nature of that unclean spirits? So I named it nature of evil. The next sub-idea was that Jesus cast out unclean spirits. It shows the nature of God, the powerful God, victorious God who cast out unclean spirits. So I named it nature of God. And then the last sub-idea is that Jesus changed the man with the unclean spirits. And we know from verses 14 through 20, it shows how this man was changed. So it reveals the nature of change. So with the title, Nature, I renamed the sub-ideas aligning with the name, Nature. So nature of evil, nature of God, and nature of change. So the next step is this: write the sermon title and sub-ideas in uniformity. So sermon title was Nature, right? And then the sub-ideas is like a nature of evil, nature of God, and nature of change. So even when I look at outline, I can see clearly, okay, I'm going to talk about nature, right? Just one thing, big idea, one keyword. So it's very clear for me to see. So when I'm clear about what I'm preaching, the audience will get that message much clearly, right? So the outline, clear outline is very, very important because this is like a backbone structure of your message. So try to make the word in uniformity, so it will be very easy to remember for you and also for the audience. The next step is this: add subtitles for sub-ideas. Now we have a skeleton, big idea, nature, a title, nature, and then sub-ideas. And then I'm putting more flesh, add more flesh onto its sub-ideas. For example, the number one sub-idea was nature of evil. Now, what is that nature? The evil is more powerful than human control. Uncontrollable, destructible power. Now, we saw that the man was uncontrollable. He just broke the chain. It's almost like a Hulk in the movie, right? So evil, that shows the nature of evil. Evil is very powerful. And evil does not love God. He knelt down before God, but he said, "Don't torture me." So he was not really worshiping God. The evil man could not love God. So that's the nature of evil. The next one is the nature of God. From verse 6 through 13, that Jesus is more powerful than the evil power. Because the legion, the 6,000 evil spirits, was defeated, right? Yet Jesus is loving because he went through the storm to the worst place ever could be to save this man. Well, we clearly know that this is a Gentile place because there's pigs, right? So that's the worst place to be. But Jesus came there no matter what. It shows the love of Jesus Christ, and that is the nature of God, right? So Jesus is more powerful, and Jesus is loving. That is the nature of God based on this text. And the last one is the nature of change, 14 through 20. The change is more powerful than the former condition because he is sitting and dressed up. Never sat, never dressed up, but now he is. So that's a big change. The change promotes love for Jesus. And first, he became a first missionary to Gentiles. Now, this man did not love God, did not love Jesus. But after this change, after that Jesus casted out the demons, now this man is begging Jesus, like, "I want to go wherever you want to go, wherever you go." So you see the there. So it shows the nature of change here. So let's put them all together. This shows the body of outline of your sermon. First, the title is the nature, right? First sub-idea is nature of evil. And then their flesh, their evil is more powerful than human. Evil does not love God. Now, second sub-idea is nature of God, which is Jesus is more powerful than evil, and Jesus is loving. The third sub-idea is nature of change. Now, change is more powerful than the former condition, and change promotes love for Jesus. Now, this is my outline. When I see it, it's very simple. It's very clear. Nature, 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 but it has some explanation, but it's not overwhelming. It's very concise. So even with the outline, I can memorize it, what I will preach on Sunday. Now, based on this outline, you can add introduction and conclusion. Some people go reverse way. They come up with title first and write the introduction right away. However, my preaching professors, and by experience, I noticed that coming up title and introduction later helps out much better, because you are going through a lot of studies of this text first, laying out the outline, and then you can actually see that, okay, I'm going to present the body of message, but I want to bring a very good icebreaker introduction to get into the body, right? You know what's coming, so you can prepare better in the introduction part. So I want to go to that, I want to do that approach. So that's why I worked on this, major body outline, and then now it's the time to do the introduction. So introduction will be something about nature, okay? And then conclusion is also in uniformity. Conclusion will be something about nature. So come up with the introduction and conclusion later. In the next training, it will be very, very interesting because now we have a skeleton of a message, right? So introduction, body, and conclusion. Now, what kind of illustrations and stories that we're going to put there? This will be very, very important because statistically, most people in the pew, when they leave the church after listening to your preaching, they don't remember everything that you spoke. Even the preacher doesn't remember everything that he spoke. But what they remember the most is this: story, illustration, right? So next training, we're going to study how we can make illustration, story, more effective so the people can understand and remember your message. Now, to do that, you need to understand, you need to interpret who your audience is. Because now you study the Bible, now you prepare the outline and everything, but when you come up with the major, the content of your sermon, you need to prepare the message based on what your audience needs. So that can relate to that. So preparing the illustration, knowing audience, that will be the very, very important point of developing your sermon script. So that will be very relevant, fun, meaningful, instructable, but life-changing message for your church congregation. So that will be the next training, and stay tuned, and I will see you in the next training. Thank you.